Okay, so we're going to do a little bit more on deviance today. It may bleed over into next week because looking at the chapter again, they have oodles and oodles and oodles of theory, and I don't know how much of that is interesting to you or how much you want to go over. But first of all, do you have any questions from last time or any questions from the book? I kind of want to play with the laser. Yeah, hopefully it's not, hopefully Amanda doesn't. All right. So let's get rolling then. So last time, most of what we talked about was essentially Durkheim. I don't know if I was completely explicit about that, but Durkheim treats crime as a social fact. Deviance is a social fact. He argues that it's going to come out of plain old human differences and humans trying to live together in communities. He makes the case that deviance is about defining and maintaining communities, both on the inside and on the outside, through maintaining boundaries, what's okay and what's not okay, and incentivizing people to follow those boundaries and guidelines. He also makes the case that you end up with good, positive movement in society when people who are deviant on the positive side are able to make things happen. Right? An example I used was Steve Jobs. There's one other thing about deviance which comes out of Durkheim too. Most of the time, he doesn't really concern himself with crime and depravity the way the average person thinks of deviance. That's why I made the joke last time about a nuts, sluts, and perverts class. Chances are, if you think about deviance as a regular person outside of sociology class, what you're really wondering about is why did this person end up to be some terrible gangland drug dealer, right? And Durkheim's just not asking that question. He kind of doesn't care. There's more to that, but we don't have time for a whole theory class. All right. Now there's one other thing, however, which I didn't mention, but which also comes out of deviance, and which Merton here, and Merton's interesting because he's writing in the 50s, but he only just passed away in 2003, actually after I had graduated from grad school, which is kind of shocking. He lived a very long time, which is good. Okay. Now, the thing that Durkheim suggests and that Merton explores is one way that you would expect deviance to go up is when society's under some sort of structural pressure. Okay? And there are a couple of books that explore this. One is Kai Erickson's Wayward Puritans, which is actually, I don't remember the date on that, so I'm not going to make a fool out of myself. Oops. Another one is kind of not a spoof, but a copy on that called Wayward Icelanders, and that one only came out within the last 10 or 15 years. Also a fun book, but they're really trying to look at, so what are the political pressures that a society's under, and how is that causing deviance to come out, right? Now again, like I said before, as a layperson, your approach to deviance is probably, what happened with this guy that turned him into a weirdo? And notice that these guys are asking, what's happening on the whole system that's causing more people to end up this way, right? That's exactly the same thing as the approach that Durkheim took in trying to understand suicide, isn't it? Instead of saying, why did this kid off himself? I'm speaking lightly, but in a class this big, this is somebody's brother, just like we mentioned before. What was wrong with this person? As a sociologist, you're not interested in the what was wrong with this person. You're interested, why are more people committing suicide in this group than are in this group, right? It's not an individual problem, it's a social problem. And so they want to know, they're taking that approach to deviance, what's causing more deviance in this situation than in this situation. And so Merton here builds out this whole theory based on the idea that there can be a mismatch between the official goals of a society, if you will, and the actual means to attain those goals. All right. Now, well, I guess that's okay. You're going to blow your eyeballs out when you do that. Try and hold it in. Be like a cartoon, right? All right. Okay, so now remember last time we talked about bureaucracies being meritocratic systems, and we'd like to think America is a fair place. You all want to grow up, get rich, become president. You all have a fair shot, right? Yeah, right, whatever. But it's what we tell ourselves. It's part of our official mythology. And so think about what it means if you're surrounded by images of wealth, success, and fame, but you don't know how to get it, right? If society's working properly, according to this, then we're all going to fight for these goals, and those of us who are best are going to be able to attain these goals. And that's how we get good doctors into neurosurgery. That's how we get good scientists into NASA. That's how we get creative finance people into finance. Never mind finance. That's a whole different thing. But you get the idea. We're all fighting for these things, and so we're going to try and win the game of life so that we can be rich and famous and powerful. Okay. The problem is, according to this, or at least a problem arises, that's a better way to say it. A problem arises when you want to achieve those goals, but there's no actual path for you to achieve those goals. And hopefully that makes sense. So let's work through this little chart I have here with the dot. All right, so over here on the left. Over here on the left-hand side, you have the goals, okay? Every time I go over this, I think of that old Nickelback song from like 10 years ago. What do we want in America? We all want to be big rock stars driving... I can't talk it. We all want to be big rock stars living hilltop houses and drive 15 cars, right? Okay. So we want to be rich. We want to be famous. We want 15 cars, bathroom I can play baseball in, right? That's a symbol of having made it. And that's a purely acceptable goal in the United States. I don't think you're here because you love sociology, although you can lie and flatter me. I think you're here because you think that this credit is going to help you get a degree, is going to help you get a better job so that you can live in hilltop mansions and drive 15 cars. We know that that's the goal. We accept that that's a goal. We kind of think anyone who says they're not interested in that goal, we kind of think they're lying. Well, I don't have to make a lot of money, but you liar, you want to be rich. Don't even pretend. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Now, over here, we have in the green, the top, accept. And we have at the bottom, in the yellow, reject. Now, what that means is, while getting rich and famous and powerful are acceptable goals, there are people who truly reject those goals. There's a lot of people who say they reject the goals, but they don't really, but they're not on here. So it's possible to say, you know what? Not only am I recognizing I'm not going to get rich, I don't want to get rich. I'm rejecting that goal. Okay? Now, here's the means at the top. How am I going to do that? Okay? If you want to actually be rich in the United States, there's a few ways to do it. If you have some musical talent, you really might try and develop that talent. You really might start doing coffee house tours, start making recordings, start pimping them all over YouTube. You're going to try and get your name out there so they can see how awesome a musician you are, right? and you're going to work until somebody recognizes you. If you have to, you'll move to Nashville, you'll move to New York, you'll move to LA, whatever part of the music industry makes the most sense, and you're going to sing your heart out until you can get the break to make it. If you have some sports ability, you're going to use that sport to get you through college. You're going to use that time in college to perfect your sport so that maybe you can go pro. And if you go pro, great, you won. But even if you go pro, you're going to keep going so that you can do better and better and better being a pro. If you're smart, you're going to do well in high school to keep your grades up. You're going to use that to get into a really good college, the best college you can get to. You're going to get out of there and you're going to go into, if you get a math degree, you're going to go into finance. If you get a bio degree, you're going to go to med school. If you get a philo degree, if you get a philo degree, you can go to law school, which used to be a path to doing well. All right? Those are the acceptable routes to succeeding in the United States. Okay? Now you can also say, I'm not going to do it that way. There are other ways to make money in the United States. If you were really clever and you had a really good artistic hand, you might try counterfeiting, right? I mean, we're talking about making money here. Wouldn't it be awesome if you could make money? You set up your printer just right, print, $20 bills. I don't know how to do this. I sort of wish I did, but I don't. But some people do, and in fact, fake 20s get circulated. You've all had people draw on your money with the yellow highlighter. That's because somebody's trying this route. That's not an appropriate method to success in the United States, but it's a method nevertheless. Drugs is wonderful. Let me say that again. Drugs are wonderful. It is a great method to getting rich in the United States. Of course, I'm talking about pharma. Crack, not an acceptable method to getting rich in the United States. Becoming Walter White on Breaking Bad might be every middle-aged man's dream, but in fact, not the right way to get rich in the United States. You get the idea. So what we have here is simply a 2x2 grid whereby you draw the two together. So if I do actually want to get rich, I accept that, and I'm going to do it using socially accepted means, then all of the examples I just gave, those are good ways to do it. If you're good at sports, you can try and make it in your sport. If you're smart, there's a zillion different things you can do. If you're creative, you can be entrepreneurial. If you think you have talent, well, you can go try and act in Hollywood or sing in Nashville. Whatever. Those are all ways to try and make it work. And that makes you a conformist. You don't, like after last time, you wouldn't think of Steve Jobs as a conformist, but as someone who seeks very much to succeed in the computer world and is doing it by dreaming up new businesses and new applications. He's very much conforming to the goals of society and the means to achieving those goals. All right? Now, if you accept the goals, but you don't have access to the means, this is where that tension that I talked about earlier at the beginning is coming from. So I grew up in the wrong neighborhood. Not me, but just pretend. My neighborhood was okay. Just pretend that you're a kid in a trailer park in the middle of nowhere, rural Georgia. Some of you are that kid. Your public school sucks, and you're on TV watching people get rich. What are your actual ways to get there? You could do farming, but all the farmers you know are multi-million-dollar business operations, and the best you can do with those guys is a $10 an hour job, and that's after you've been promoted. Note, I'm not dissing $10 an hour jobs, but you're never going to be living in a hilltop mansion with 15 cars. Right? That's not clear to you. Same thing with the tree farms, but again, those are all owned by like Weyerhaeuser, and the best you can do is run one of those cool machines. What's that worth? And it's not worth $250,000 a year, is it? All right, so that's not going to work. You could do really well in school, and you are getting straight A's, but your school is kind of a disaster, and getting straight A's at your school means nothing to anybody even in Macon, much less Atlanta and New York. Georgia, where is that? Right? So, crap. Everyone says that you should, go out and get a job, and so you go get a McDonald's job, $8.50, and you smell like fries. What's your path to getting rich? Well, if it's rural Georgia and you're white, it's meth, right? Now, you have to actually be good at meth to get rich doing meth, but this kid doesn't see that. This kid just sees, okay, this is the way that the people I know who are making money are actually making money. That's the argument. Now, what's interesting about this is that guy, he's a drug dealer, but according to Merton, he's an innovator. He's innovating a way to get rich outside of society's prescribed paths. Does that make sense? And when you start thinking about most really successful illegal businesses, that's exactly what they are. How can I gain power? How can I gain wealth? How can I gain respect from people? Well, this is the path that I can do it. And think about, not to dredge up stereotypes, but if it's 1940 or 1920 and you're a working class Irish Italian in New Jersey, what, are you going to be Buddy the Cake Boss? No, right? You can see how it works. Now, financial crimes, when they're illegal, they fit under here. When they're not illegal, but perhaps unethical, we just call that good business. But if they're illegal, you're trying to dream up a way outside of the acceptable channels. That makes you, again, an innovator. Okay, let's go over here to the ritualists. So, the ritualist is kind of funny. It's not so much that they are rejecting the goals of society. It's more like they've given up on them. They might reject them insofar as, like in a sour grape sense. Look, I got gray in my beard. Am I going to end up rich by the time I needed to start that about 15 years ago? But that's okay, because I didn't want to be rich anyway. Right? Whatever. Okay, so the ritualist has given up on getting rich, but you still have to go to work, right? So what do? You get up and you go to work. And when people complain about midlife, it's funny how much those complaints fall into exactly this category. Your life is devolved into getting up at 5, getting the kids on the bus, going to work. You're not really there's not a clear path to actually do better at work, but you can't quit because you sort of need the money. You're not going to work because you love work. Think about the way that we talk to young people in college. Do what you love, follow your passion. Well, it's no wonder Louis C.K.'s whole shtick is about, oh, I'm 40 and I don't have any passion. Sorry, a lot of doors shut. So what are you going to do? I'll go to work, right? See what I'm saying? That's the ritualist. You're going to work mostly out of a ritual. You're living your life mostly out of a ritual. Now, it doesn't mean you have to end up like this, but again, in Merton's category of deviance, in fact, these guys, the ritualists, they're only deviant insofar as they're not still, yeehaw, I'm going to win. And now that I think about it, if you're too cynical about your job, the people around you, they get annoyed, don't they? Like, you actually do get a little bit of informal sanction for having given up. Yeah, well, it's a coffee shop job. Yeah, but don't you want to run Starbucks eventually? Who are we kidding? Like, you start bringing that kind of negativity into the workplace, and actually people do give you a certain amount of grief. So maybe they are sort of deviant. Okay, the best over here though are those who reject and reject. Right? They reject the goals and means, they reject the means. These guys are entertaining, and they actually fall into two different categories who are nothing alike whatsoever. Okay? So the despondent alcoholics. There are so many stereotypes here, and I don't want to dredge up stereotypes. But if you think about those stereotypes, the despondency actually fits. Okay? So by the time I'm living under a bridge downtown, and I'm panhandling to get, a teeny little thing of liquor, I know I'm not getting rich. You know I'm not getting rich. At no point in my life, as a 40-year-old homeless guy with an alcohol problem, at no point am I thinking, okay, it's still possible for me to be president of the United States. Right? Now, if someone, we sort of want them to be cheery. Oh no, you can do better. But seriously, like when I was taking social classes 25 years ago in college, I'd think about, let's help the homeless. Yeah, because what are we going to give them? A crappy apartment in a bad neighborhood and a counter job at McDonald's. Like, that's an improvement for this guy. Is that really what you're working for? It's a little bit sad. Why did it occur to me that it was a little bit sad? Maybe I'm an arrogant elitist? Yeah, right. Well, maybe. But also, the actual goals that are acceptable are completely out of reach for this guy. His goal is so low that you have that life right now and you're unhappy with it. But that would be an improvement for him, right? So for this guy, I'll crash at the mission. I got a place under the bridge if the mission's full. And really seriously, if I can get $5, let's go tie one on. Man, that's despondent, isn't it? Well, that's your retreatist. You're retreating from not just the game, but the end result of the game. You've just flat out completely given up. And there are people like that in the world, right? Go ahead.
What if a person chooses to be homeless?
Well, if they're choosing to be homeless, they fit perfectly, right? Because if you're choosing to be homeless, you're saying, I'm not chasing those goals, right? Hold that thought, because I wonder if maybe the next set of characters doesn't match what you're thinking, okay? Now, the example I have up here are the rebels, and I put communes, monasteries, and the Amish, right, as examples. But this might fit too. I like your thinking. There's actually a guy that's been written up a few times that lives out in Utah that won't use money, and he's completely and utterly 100% homeless. And when people give him money, he goes and gives it to his homeless friends. He just lives on what he can find in dumpsters, and he's the happiest SOB you ever met because, he's almost like Zen. He does not fit the first part. He fits the second part, the rebels. Okay, so think about the hippies. The hippies were entertaining. A big thing that the hippies were up to was they were not going to accept social goals, which is a little bit crazy. But if you dial up some of that old 60s and 70s music, a lot of it is giving up on materialism. I don't want to be rich. This is stupid. I'm thinking that there's a Fight Club thing in there too, isn't there? But anyway, being rich is stupid. I don't want to be better than anybody. I'm not trying to be Gordon Gekko. In fact, I just want to be completely left alone. Now, all right, so they're not chasing being rich. And when it comes to how they're going to live their lives, they're not going to follow traditional American patterns of anything. And we touched on this a little bit last time, which is why I'm using the hippie example. But by the time you say, all right, you know what, let's all of us move together to this commune property. Somebody owns it. I don't care who. As long as we can be there, we can be there. And we're not going to own stuff. We're all going to live in a big tent together. And we're not going to be jealous and weird about girlfriends and boyfriends. We're just going to, if you're game, hey, you're game. And we're not going to have chores. We're all going to work together to get stuff planted. That's not how you run a modern American farm. That's not how you run a modern American family. That's not how you run a modern American business. But these guys were actually trying to do something completely different. Now, whether or not it worked, that's a different question. But you'll notice in doing that, they're saying, I'm not accepting the rat race, and I'm not accepting the goals of the rat race, right? That makes them rebels. And when I use the hippie example, the hippie commune, it's kind of entertaining because A, sometimes it's fun to pick on hippies. B, most all of them just flat out failed spectacularly. But what about monasteries? You'll notice a monastery is a hippie commune that someone said they were doing in the name of God. But take the God part out, it's a hippie commune. Right? And why do you join a monastery? You join a monastery because you're not interested in playing the rat race game. Right? If you join a monastery, what's your goal? I want to love God. Maybe the hippies are loving nature and each other. The monastery, they're loving God. Dude, you can like God all you want. That is not an acceptable American goal. Right? You could do that on your own time. If you're in America, you're supposed to get rich. Okay, so they want to love God, which is certainly not the traditional American goal. We could have a huge, entertaining historical discussion on that, but we're not going to today. You want to join a commune where you don't actually own anything except your underwear and your slippers. Everything else is paid for. The stuff in your room is owned by the monastery. The room you're living in is owned by the monastery. The monastery is owned by the monastery. Monasteries are old-fashioned communists, right? It's a hippie commune, but in the name of God and without free love. But the monasteries I visited have plenty of beer, so that's a good thing. Go ahead.
What was the reason most of the hippie communes you tried failed?
That's actually a good question. I think so the first caveat I have to give is that I've only studied really closely a handful of them, and it was a little while ago, all right? But as a gut reaction, I think one of the reasons was they were not really clear about human nature. They were built on a model of love, and love's great and all, but even amongst people who say that they're not about status is going to end up mattering, just because. And even people who say they're not all about jealousy, like there's a lot of folks that say when it comes to their personal life, they're not really that jealous. But if you actually get them to be brutally honest with themselves, what they mean is my partner shouldn't be pissed if I cheat on her, but if she cheats on me, I'm going to be pissed. So unless you have very emotionally open and strong people, a free love environment's not going to work. And thirdly, I think the economics just flat out failed. You got to have someone in our world, someone has to own that property. If you're squatting, you're going to get kicked off, number one. Number two, I'm thinking of Easy Rider. There's a scene in Easy Rider where they're trying to sow wheat like, Jesus. Remember that conversation where we were talking about Weber and the iron cage? Sowing wheat, Jesus style, works in cities and nations that are Jesus-sized, right? And a town at that time might have been 500 to a metropolis would have been 10,000. And in today's world, I don't think, in today's world, I think you need better yields than Jesus harvesting. And thirdly, they didn't know what the hell they were doing. So the reason that I'm pulling that up and putting it next to the monasteries with which I'm familiar are still communist in that everything is owned in common, but they're different insofar as their overall economic structure actually is well tuned to the outside world. By that I mean, if we go back 100 years to the founding of a lot of American monasteries, they were founded by people who were farmers. So they went ahead and distributed chores. But you went out and you did your work, but when you farmed in a way that was actually going to create yield as opposed to just Jesus sowing seed. Number two, they might have been at the individual level communists, but the monastery as a business unit was effective, meaning they brought in more profit than they actually spent doing things. Here's an aside. Everything in life works like an investment, right? If you're going to spend time making friends with a person, you got to get more enjoyment out of that than you're actually spending. And if it's a good friendship, that person's going to get more enjoyment out of it than he or she is spending, right? So there's very few things you can actually just waste resources on, and these guys recognize that. So they had farms, they sold some of their stuff, they lived off some of that stuff, but they were building their wealth instead of eroding their wealth. And I think the hippie kids, because they didn't know what they were doing, they lost capital here. It's funny to talk about communes and capital, and I'm talking about capital at the large sort of fluid level, not just money. But if you're burning your social capital with weird personal relationships, that's a problem. If you're burning your actual resources, your physical capital, with bad farming practices, that's a problem all the way down the line. So I think they just weren't effective businesses. Did you have your hand up earlier? Okay, go ahead, and then I'll get you.
The farm up 96, like when you go towards Swiss County,
Yeah.
you go through Jeffersonville, there was a yonder farm, as they called it, and it was up for like probably 30 years.
Sweet.
And it got shut down like 5 years ago, I think, because they didn't either tax it. They were making plenty of money selling it.
And you know, can you imagine the irony? Hey, I'm not judging. Just watch out for enforcement. That's actually really interesting and painfully ironic, considering we're probably within 5 years of pot being legalized recreationally across the whole stinking country. And it's a little bit pathetic, because think about the American implications of that, right? So as we're successful killing American pot because, law enforcement does its job, where do we get our drugs? Well, we get it through Mexico, and those guys are much scarier than a bunch of hippies on 96.
Actually, 70% of the pot that we have in the U.S. is actually from the U.S.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because,
I'm all for
up in the hills,
made in America.
that's where most of it comes from.
Up in the,
Appalachians.
yeah, I've heard that. Especially I've heard that. Well, and pot's a little bit of a problem when it comes to an illegal drug. If you're trying to make money from it, it would be better to be done here at home, simply because, well, think about this. If you want to make money on illegal alcohol, just imagine this in your head. All right, you could buy yourself jugs and jugs and jugs of apple juice and ferment it. Well, beer juice? No. Never mind. If you went and you bought a whole bunch of beer illegally and you wanted to go sell it so you could make a little bit of money to, 18-year-olds, there we go. That's illegal. That works. If you're supplying one 18-year-old party with alcohol and you want to make some money, you're going to have a stack of beer this high or a keg, right? And that's very, very big. If you wanted to make a little bit more money, you might say, skip the beer, let's move straight to malt liquor, right? Beer fermented once. I don't know if it really is, but work with me. Because you're going to get the same amount of people just as drunk, and instead of a keg, you're going to need like a little keg. And you can charge them the same amount. See how the business works out on smuggling here? Now, if you're really thinking about profit, and you really have to move stuff, and you really want to remove risk, carrying a big old sloshing of malt liquor still isn't the best thing. Just skip it all and go straight to bourbon, which is similar goop, right? It's a wheat, corn, mush, barley, whatever you want to put in it. But that's distilled down to 80 proof, 40%, and one bottle of Jack is going to take you as far as a whole case of beer, you and another person, right? Which you should actually have 3 or 4 people for a whole bottle. But you get the idea, same cost, but you're only carrying this much, right? So in the economics of it, I'm not surprised that a lot of the pot comes from the United States, but I also know that those dudes on the other side of the border are going to be happy to pick up whatever business they can, and they are terrifying. I'd rather that hippies and hillbillies in Appalachia grow our pot, but that's me. Hand, go ahead.
What about like homesteaders in Alaska? Do they do like retreatists?
Yes, they absolutely would be retreatists. And the question is, what about homesteaders in Alaska? Yeah, totally. And their whole definition of success is, can we make the homestead work as a business? And the only reason you're trying to make it as a business is so I can be absolutely 100% left alone. Now, if you're on, I don't know, History Channel or TLC or whoever it is that has these shows, the homesteaders in Alaska, notice they're a little bit different than the gold diggers. There's a reason gold digger is kind of a pejorative. If you're a gold digger in Alaska, you are only trying to get rich, right? And that's all you're doing there. So you're actually the opposite of a retreatist. You're just a very adventurous conformist. Make sense? If you're panning just enough so that you can get by, well, okay. If you're a trapper, that sort of fits with the retreatists. But if you're trying to like hit big success, you're a conformist. All right. Isn't this fun? So it's kind of a hoot. Now, you can see then how a society under pressure is going to either cut down on the total amounts of wealth to go around, right? If in fact nobody gets, like if you think about the old Soviet Union, if it's actually impossible to get rich, quote unquote impossible, then by default, simply trying is going to make you a criminal. And all of the interesting stuff there happened on the black market, didn't it? By default, it was illegal because you couldn't even aim for the goal. There wasn't enough of the goal to go around. At the same time, if you're in a world that's very, very rich, but it's something of an oligarchy so that really only the very rich have access to that, and you have no idea how to get there, that's going to cause deviance too, but for a different reason, because there aren't enough channels to success to go around. If there's not enough success to go around, or if there's not enough channels of success to go around because society is under pressure, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. At least that's what Merton says. All right, you know what? I don't know if I want to talk about that. Plus, you can get it in the book. Maybe I'll say it very quickly. So the social disorganization, there's some huge weaknesses with this one. Social disorganization is going to essentially say, you'll notice how there's lots of problems in a handful of neighborhoods over and over and over and over again. Where does that come from? Well, the social disorganization theorists are going to say, well, if you look at the neighborhood you're talking about and look at the examples I used, A, what are the families like, right? Is it mom and dad and a couple of kids and grandma to help take care of the kids? No, it's mom and her fourth boyfriend, and the fourth boyfriend's kid from his third wife is over, and grandma, well, that's if there's grown-ups around at all, because usually it's grandma raising all the children, right? I'm sort of kidding, but then again, this is also sort of our families here, right? The institutions, how good is the church? Is the church actually being helpful? No, when the church is busy, is not busy actually trying to get rich off of us or sucker us out of donations, they're embarrassing us to the rest of the city, right? There's churches like that. And some of them are in funky neighborhoods. How about the schools? Well, the schools, whatever. There's a reason all the rich people try and move to a different area. It's because the schools aren't functioning to actually rebuild society. In this model, what these social institutions are doing is supporting the foundations of society. And when these start breaking down, you can't keep reproducing a natural, healthy, quote unquote, society in those environments. The neighborhoods themselves, like I love the picture in the book. It's a ugly, I think it must be Baltimore. It's an ugly, broke down, terrible looking neighborhood. And there's even a certain sense of that. If you go to rich people's neighborhoods, they're beautiful. They spend extra enough to actually look pretty. You go to poor people's neighborhoods, they're not beautiful. So even the underlying aesthetics matters. But the fact that the cops are there all the time matters. And the fact that nobody cleans up after anything matters. And the fact that nobody cares. All of that leads to criminality too. And the fact that the contextual criminality, so what are the other grown-ups and kids in your neighborhood doing? All of them are up to no good, okay? Now, here's the problem with this, and this is the part that makes me nervous about this. In sociology, it's always a challenge to get away from correlative to causal, okay? What's an example of this? Well, think about the suicide example that Durkheim had. So if the Catholics are less likely to kill themselves, and the Protestants are more likely to kill themselves as a whole, what Durkheim is trying to do is to delve down and figure out why Catholics are different. And when he says, well, they're more socially connected with each other, notice he's saying that social connection causes a lower suicide rate. Okay, has he proven this? Not at all. It's entirely possible that a lower suicide rate causes Catholicism. I mean, I don't know how, but you know what? I totally screwed up that example. It was so clear in my head, and then it came out kind of sideways. You can see it with the cholesterol and heart attacks. Like right now, cholesterol recommendations are shifting inside of the health industry, healthcare. Where they're going to go, I don't really know. But for the last 50 years, we've thought cholesterol causes heart attacks. And then we successfully got people to lower their cholesterol, and the heart attacks didn't really change as much as we thought they should have. That actually tells us that what we saw as causal, A causing B, was actually just correlative. The two changed together, but we don't know why. All right? Notice how, with this theory, social disorganization, we're going to the nasty neighborhoods, and we're looking at the nasty neighborhoods. What's your definition of a nasty neighborhood? Well, the neighborhood looks like hell. The cops are everywhere. I'm scared to death. I can see drug dealing on the corner. The schools are a disaster. And, well, I'm not judging anybody, but their families are a mess. Right? I am too, judging people. Now, okay, so I just gave the definition of a funky neighborhood, and I went around and said, so what causes funky neighborhoods is all of these things. So all of this stuff is happening together. It's really kind of a challenge to say that this isn't causing this. Does that make sense? Now, part of why this one gets traction, and the book mentions that this one influences policy the most, is what strikes you as the most commonsensical, the easiest to understand. Well, this one's great because exactly what we don't like in funky neighborhoods, well, if we can fix that, then the funky neighborhoodness goes away. Well, maybe, right? It's a little bit like cholesterol. If the problem is something other than the schools suck or the schools don't have enough money, so we dump stacks of money into the schools, but the neighborhoods don't improve, then we didn't actually solve the problem, right? If we, and that's, this one just gives us a definition as if it were causal, glossing over some of the real serious problems. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. And then the cultural deviance is, sometimes it's called a culture of poverty one, and they're talking about Sean McKay, but a much more recent guy or a more influential guy is Wilson, who includes a little bit of culture of poverty. But if you grow up in a bad, nasty neighborhood with bad, shaky parents, and everyone around you is involved in illegal things, and how they define success is their success at those illegal things, and that's what you're around, guess what you're going to learn, right? And the answer is the illegal things. Okay? Most of us grow up in the religion of our parents. We act like religion is about a cosmic truth out there, and when we tell people, I believe this because it's a cosmic truth out there, okay, but if you grew up in Saudi Arabia, your cosmic truth out there would be the same as your parents. And if you grew up in Georgia, your cosmic truth out there would be the same as your parents. And if you grew up in China, your cosmic truth, you see where this is going, right? So the cosmic truth out there has, or at least our interpretation of it, has a lot to do with who our parents were. Except for when we look at the funky neighborhoods and we say, well, I don't care how bad those schools are and what a disaster those parents are, those kids should have known better. Well, that's a little bit like a Chinese Buddhist saying, I don't care how Catholic their parents are, I don't care how much Baptist stuff is on the freeway signs, they should have known better. Well, how do you think that's going to work, right? But that's a culture of poverty argument. That one's down here on the bottom. That one does a little bit better than that one. In my head, I have reasons why, but in fact, those might be entirely biases. All right, I want to throw those. I cannot, I'm really nervous here about the time because now I'm down to 10 minutes before the hour or 15 minutes before the hour. And this is why I was thinking we're going to go over. You simply cannot do a sociology class about deviance and spend 15 minutes on conflict theory. It's just wrong. It's immoral. It would be deviant. Okay. And the book I'm kind of shocked at how the book glosses over conflict on this one, and I'm not sure why that is. But that's okay. Let's see, we got conflict. Yeah, and then they go to symbolic interaction. Maybe it's because I did a whole deviance course last semester, and we talked deviance for the whole semester. But there's so much that's packed into this slide and the next slide that we might have to take deviance into next week as well. We'll be deviating next week by deviating from the syllabus. We'll be doubly deviant. All right, so Mills is, you've already met Mills. Mills is C. Wright Mills. You met him on day one when the book and I talked about the sociological imagination. Mills, I'm not going to say he single-handedly changed the direction of sociology in the 60s, but he is a bellwether for how sociology turned to become more conflict-focused in the 60s. Maybe if he wasn't one of the key writers at the time, someone else would have been, but he's who we got. And so that's absolutely, completely significant. Now, he's got a book called The Power Elite, and The Power Elite essentially is a discussion of, power in America. No, I won't say that. It'll be too confusing. Essentially, the case that he makes, and what he did is he went through the boards of, I don't know exactly how many, but say the top 50 largest companies, figured out who was sitting on those boards, and found that there was a lot of overlap, right? I might be CEO of Mike Inc., but I'll be sitting on the board of Paul Inc., and Paul is sitting on the board of Mike Inc., and Amanda's not old enough to have her own corporation, but she can sit on the boards till she's big enough to have her own, right? Then she can be CEO of her. You see how this works, right? So there's a lot of overlap in the elite class at the corporate level. Now, he focused on business, he focused on politics, and he focused on the military. And in the 60s, the military was a little bit, the 50s and 60s leading up to that, was a little bit different than now. Nowadays, it's, like I said before, it's like 1% of the population is actually in the military, which is a tremendous difference from coming out of the 40s when the draft existed and every working age man went off to fight. Everyone who possibly could went off to fight World War II. So you're going from 50% or 80% of men to 1% of the whole population. The role of the military has changed very, very much. But he's talking about the military, and he's looking back at the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So who's important in the military? Well, the military's got its own chain of command, but the people that end up at the top, they usually aren't grunts. They're usually themselves coming from better families. And politics, well, politics and business, they go together rather well, don't they? Go ahead.
I have to disagree with you. In the Army and the Marines,
Mm-hmm.
most of the generals actually were infantry.
That's actually awesome.
If you actually look up most 4-star generals in the Army, you'll notice a blue bar above all the ribbons.
Mm-hmm.
Going around, it's called a combat infantry badge.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of jobs also where if they went into intelligence, they can't do their platoon leading time when they're a lieutenant in intelligence. So what they'll do is they'll give them to the infantry, they'll do their infantry time for a few years and then move.
Okay.
They're part of the drill force, too.
So here's the problem with that. I'm sure you're right. Okay, thank you for telling me.
There you go.
The thing that's important about this is that Mills is talking. This book came out in the late 50s, early 60s, and he's talking about the last 20 or 30 years of the United States, and he's talking about the military at the time. And so I'm giving you what Mills said because I don't have enough background in the military myself, and especially not the military of the 50s. It's very good if the generals have done time as actual grunts. Awesome, good for them. That's kind of the way it should be, right? You want your leaders to know what they're leading.
Positions were created, even in the early 90s. You had say a captain or something that
Mm-hmm.
everybody was somebody, so they made commander and a whole new brigade and stuff like that. So if you knew you're a good part of the family, you went to West Point, then
Yeah, I'm going to have to take you guys' word on that. Because, again, like I said, I'm not that strong on that. I will say, if you just think about the way humans are in any sort of institution or structure, of course, I'm going to lean towards people I know and people that I like, and I'm going to try and help them out, and they're going to try and help me out. We call that politics. And in just about any organization, you recognize that there's quite a lot of politics, especially as you start to move up. And I wouldn't be surprised if the military was similar, all right? Now, the thing is that you got to remember when Mills is writing, he's writing just a few years after the famous military-industrial complex speech. And nowadays, like I said, the military is different enough that we might, if we cared enough to go compare, we might have to draw a different sort of setup. But the essential point that the people who are the elites are different kind of stands, okay? So the last college I taught at, I think I told you this, they charged somewhere in the neighborhood of $54,000 a year tuition. Now, obviously not everybody paid $54,000 a year tuition, but don't let that fool you. Some people actually wrote checks for $54,000 a year for their children, right? And when I talked to these guys, one of the things that came up from more than one student, I was a little bit surprised because I thought this was on TV or like something, it's until you see a thing, it's hard to actually believe it. But, like I'm sitting in my office and a student's telling me, yeah, well, I'd really like to move out of the dorms. I'm so over that. You're a freshman. Yeah, but, I was living at sleepaway camp with, for the last 4 years, I was living at blah, blah, blah high school. Like, remember Dead Poet Society? Yeah, that, right? Oh, really? Not that school, but that kind of setup. Well, who are your roommates? Like, who are your friends? Oh, so-and-so's dad's a diplomat in blah, 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 and this guy's running the company. I'm like, oh, holy crap, I got a friend from high school. He's a realtor in New Mexico. So from the very beginning, these guys are often in schools that are having not local experiences, but broader experiences. They're with people who, now let's think about this. What's this kid's high school experience and how well is he going to relate to someone? Last night we went to the choir thing at Veterans, and there's the Northside kids singing. The Northside kids were awesome. I mean, everybody was awesome. What's this guy got to do with Northside? And Northside's a decent school, right? How's this guy going to understand Southwest up in Macon? Right? It's from 14 on, this kid's lived in a different world. And do you think his parents, and this kid's position, if I mentioned his family, you would actually know who I'm talking about, so I won't. Did this kid grow up in the same world you and I grew up in? Absolutely not. Right? Now, the reason that's important is because if you're going through the same life experiences as other well-to-do people, as other powerful people, and then you get into jobs that aren't chicken factory jobs for your first job out of college, and then you go to grad school and you're not taking on gobs of student loans out of grad school, and then you're not getting, then you're getting good jobs, and this has to do with the people not this person gave me a job, but I knew this person. I knew that there was a job opening in her company. She put in a good word for me. Like, I still got the job, but it was a result of networking that had been done years prior. And now I'm in the company, and I've gotten to do really well, and I've been working with this company, and so I end up sitting on their board. The picture that Mills is trying to paint is that, and it's not that different from what our theorists would have said just a couple of chapters ago. The people who are running the country, who are in positions of power, actually do represent not a solid aristocracy, but something of an oligopoly, an elite. If you're in the top 5%, you're going to have more access to those leadership positions. You're going to take those leadership positions. You and everyone you know are going to have more access to them. And would you ever hire a kid from a chicken factory with a college degree from a liberal arts college you never heard of into those companies? It ain't going to happen. Go ahead.
It's funny that you were saying that you had that experience with one of the students. I had experience with my friend when I lived in Europe. We were doing a trip in Ardennes, and my friend from Saudi Arabia was like, "Can you help me real quick?" She wanted me to teach her how to wash dishes. She never washed dishes in her entire life. To me, and I'm like, okay, why? Turned out her father was like some Saudi Arabian diplomat. She learned to go to school every day and didn't know how to wash dishes. I just couldn't understand how you don't know how to do this.
So the story, because you're up front here. So the story is, she had a friend on a study abroad? Who?
I lived in Germany.
Living in Germany, whose dad was a Saudi diplomat, and because he was a diplomat, they had house help, so she never learned to wash dishes. And when she went to school, it wasn't in her parents' used Toyota, it was in a limo.
In 2 years, I'm like, why are you always late? My limo driver was like, what?
Yeah, you can't. I'm not going to get in trouble because my limo driver was late. Yeah, that's awesome. Now, the thing is there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you succeed that well in life, good, more power to you. But the power elite that Mills, the point that he's trying to make is for all our talk of meritocracy and democracy, the way advantage works, a more contemporary language would call it privilege, but I'm going to go with the old-fashioned language of advantage. The way advantage works is such that the people who are at the top have more access to power and more resources to protect that access so that they're going to stay there, okay? Now, the funny thing is, the book doesn't, here's where this is weird. So, right? Yeah, see? It's weird. Okay. So the book gives us conflict. It gives us a little definition. It talks about Mills, and then it goes into the discussion about the difference in sentencing for crack and coke. All right? Now, there may be something, and that's this one, right? Yeah, because it's a class crime. Now, the argument behind sentencing differences for crack and coke is pretty straightforward. Who does coke? Frat boys in Wall Street. Who does crack? Poor black folks, right? I don't know if I'm allowed to say that out loud. Don't YouTube that, because it'll end up out of context and I'm going to look terrible. The reason this matters is because people are scared enough of drugs, and they're scared enough about the demographic that's associated with crack, that when the crack epidemic happens, we end up with minimum sentencing guidelines that lead to something like a 10-fold increase in the penalty for the same amount of crack as the same amount of coke. Now, when we had a cocaine epidemic, we made movies like Less Than Zero. And, Hollywood got nosebleeds, and we didn't care. Now, I'm a little bit curious I have my questions about that particular study, but to stop there is to really fundamentally misunderstand, or at least understate, the importance of what conflict theory brings to the table in terms of deviance, okay? So rich people's drugs get hammered less than poor people's drugs. As far as conflict theory goes, that absolutely makes perfect sense. And the example I started with last time, or I talked about last time, why is it that the guy in Wolf of Wall Street gets to do coke off of prostitutes' derriere all day long and it doesn't matter? That's part of the conflict theory point. He can do as many drugs, he can do as much illegal stuff as he wants, and he gets a pass over and over and over again because he is who he is, and the rest of us don't get that much of a pass. And people, that's in Manhattan. You go just down the street to Harlem or Brooklyn and have a black kid doing that stuff, and it's not going anywhere, right? I mean, he's get 2 tries, and that's if he's lucky. Chances are he gets 1 try. See what I'm saying? That makes perfect sense from a conflict perspective. Notice they don't really delve into that, but there's even more, okay? The real beauty of the conflict perspective is actually focusing in or zeroing in on how different things get defined as deviant and then get sanctioned. Does that make sense? So drug use really isn't that bad unless it's the drug that poor blacks or poor white trash does. So if it's crack, well, that kid's in trouble. If it's meth, that kid's in trouble. How much trouble do the college students get for sharing their Ritalin and Adderall, selling it back and forth at exam time? Not a hell of a lot. You do realize that Ritalin and Adderall are full-on pharmaceutical level amphetamines, stuff that in the 70s would have been called speed. Better than crack, but they don't get in trouble, right? Because that somehow is less bad. That's actually a deeper conflict level point, right? And an even better, if we're going to talk drugs, is, we all know drugs are a problem. And yeah, maybe drugs are a problem. We talked about this a little bit last time. But illegal drugs are a problem somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 15,000 people getting killed every year. Legal pharma, not even improperly used, is associated with something like 100,000 deaths a year. Tenfold more people die from legal drugs than illegal drugs, all right? Now, this is not some hippie made-up statistic. This is published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, one of the best medical journals. It's done by a researcher at Johns Hopkins. Now, that individual researcher may be something of a hippie, but it's coming from Johns Hopkins, and it's getting published through JAMA, so it's not all made up. See what I'm saying? And I'm sure that if we sliced out the actual profits, illegal drugs, I'm sure it's a good industry for the people that succeed in it. The legal drugs, some of those brands, the ones that are household names, can be good for $1 billion a year per brand. Okay. So, from a conflict perspective, understanding that deep down inside, yes, humans like chemical substances that change their bodies, right? What's going on here? Well, the people who make money selling legal drugs are going to do every single thing they possibly can to keep making money on those legal drugs and expand their ability to make money on those legal drugs. Now, do I have a problem with this? No, I'm an American capitalist. But that doesn't mean they're good for you, right? And it doesn't mean sometimes some of that might just maybe a little bit be questionably ethical, right? Well, okay, we know that people like drugs of all sorts, and over here, outside of the acceptable channels, we're going to come down on these guys, and we're going to come down on them like a load of bricks. But only if they're a kind of demographic that we really want to pick on. Does that make sense? So the real learning or insight that comes from conflict theory isn't, yeah, look, Coke doesn't get hit hard, but crack does. It's who decides what's actually deviant. Does that make sense? So Wall Street kids can do drugs until their brains turn to mush, and that's just part of what's going on, right? Pharma can sell legal drugs for things that may or may not be ethical, and as long as we're posting stock share increases, that's okay. But crack, well, you try that once, man, you're hooked forever. We can't have that. It's kind of crazy when you see it, and that's just a drug example, and that's just because that's the one I know the most about. Go ahead.
It's like pharmacies, like they have the reps, and the reps, you can't buy a doctor out, but you can take them to a basketball game, and if you feed them at the basketball game, they can write that down as business dinner and stuff like that. So they do it in the military too. It's like the joke, like, okay, which rep is going to bring us the best lunch? That's who the doctor is going to go with. Or if they bring in, like, I was orthotics, whichever one brought in the good sports bags with the braces and stuff like that.
Yes.
They're not legally supposed to do that, but they find a way, but nobody gets in trouble for it.
Yeah, and on the plus side, some of those rules have been changing. So pharma can't be quite as generous as it was with physicians. And so, I guess that's a good thing. But yes, you're right. And there's a lot of stories to go along with that. Now, what they're not allowed to do is to say, hey, write my prescription and I'll take you to a basketball game, because that would be a kickback. And that is absolutely illegal. But the way the system works, and they've worked very, very hard to get here, is they can tell from downstream prescription data who is actually driving the prescriptions, even though they're not allowed to directly track with which physician is doing it. It has to do with which pharmacy things are getting filled at, if that makes sense. And it's all downstream data. And your rep is going to lean on you to write their drug. And if the competitor's drugs are what are succeeding, then you're probably not going to get as many basketball games, right? Go ahead, Cecil.
My primary care doctor was closed a week last summer because the entire office went to Tabby Island, and for a week it was sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, and I think they had to attend 2 or 3 one-hour sessions the entire time that they were there for a whole week.
Yeah, I'll go from one, so I'd rather just do the 2 other 5 classes.
Yeah, and I ran some of those meetings. Not the Tybee ones, but yes. It's hard to say it's wrong, right? Here's the thing. If you believe in freedom in the American marketplace, then to try and influence your clients by taking them to dinner, that's the way business works, right? Anybody in sales? Yeah, let's go have dinner. Of course, they know that you're treating them because you want to make some money off of them. Everybody knows how it is. The bigger thing, though, is if you recognize all of this resource going into the way the stuff works legally, that may or may not be actually helping people. Again, you're free to take drugs if you want. We like drugs. I get it. Then what do we do on the other side when part of what we're doing is just scooping people off the street, hoping we can get drug convictions and locking them in jail for as long as we can, or getting as many fines out of them as we can? You start to recognize that there's a couple different systems going on here, despite the fact that this is all happening in American law, and it's working along the lines of bio or psychokinetic substances. Does that make sense? And that's where conflict is going to come from. Who were the first police? The Pinkertons? The Pinkertons, were they hired by their community to keep everyone safe? Nope, they were hired by the company who was trying to keep its employees from joining a union. If you have a crappy neighborhood because you don't have any money, one of the things you live at the mercy of is the level of violence of your neighbors. As soon as you make some good money, what do? You move out, you hire your own security, right? This is not a dig on the cops. Instead, it's a conflict theory point that I'm trying to make. You will note that what gets defined as deviant is done by the people who are on top, that power elite. They will do what they can to get their activities to be legal, whether or not you might think they're ethical. And when it comes to enforcing those, that's going to be aimed at the bottom. The most cynical conflict theory perspective is that the deviance system exists to support the status quo. Now, I would like to think it's not that bad, but if you approach this cynically, that's going to be the conflict theory perspective. Now again, notice, and this is my frustration with the text on this particular chapter, notice how much bigger and deeper a point that is than, well, Coke isn't prosecuted as bad as crack. Well, there's a reason for that. Because the system supports a status quo, which is different than the system supports your rights and your securities as an American citizen, if that makes sense. All right, that was fun. See you on Monday? Monday.